Nice. All right.
Good.
So Anna, is it time to start?
It is, but we're still missing about 40 people.
Well, I'll keep an eye
You
on
can
it.
start chatting because you always give us some good stuff anyway.
Oh, yeah, let's do all the secret stuff now, all the good stuff, and then tell them what they missed. So what secret stuff do you want to go over?
Oh, everything is secret. Okay, maybe we'll start with a few questions that Andy dropped at us. So first one was, where does this new book sit in the hierarchy of which of your books you think should be read first by a self-defense trainee?
I think this should probably be one of the last ones to read. And it's going into some weirder stuff, and it's really hard to get in that unless you trust the person that wrote it first. So it's one of those meditations and facing. If you read them and they were useful, then this is a deeper book. But I think a lot of people, if they just pick it up and read through it, it won't make as much sense. You know, if someone's talking about how to manipulate your own brain, it takes a huge level of trust before any smart person will listen to that. So I think it's a super basic book in a sense, and you know, could be as a foundational maybe, but I don't see anyone reading it and just taking my word for it unless they know me. So that one I put, it's kind of a later book.
Okay, sounds good. Should we get a quicker one maybe? At some point.
Okay, so you guys are.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Tell me what's your plan. I thought we'd go through another 2 questions maybe till we get
Okay.
a few people.
Let's do some questions. I'm here.
You also mentioned that things you discover for yourself integrate more deeply than anything you are told. That being the case, are there any things that you always only allow students to learn through play and self-discovery?
I try to do everything I can that way. There are some things that we can't. There's some things that are just too dangerous to actually do. And some of the deepest lessons are in the dangerous stuff. There are things that you can simulate. But as long as the part of their brain knows that it's not for real, that they aren't going to die, that deeper part of the brain, the intuitive brain, knows it's artificial and won't trust it when something real happens. So one of the things with emphasizing through play, and I may be going off on a tangent, when you're just moving your body and you're having fun moving your body and you aren't trying to be scripted, you're just figuring it out, then the body learns that it worked. It learns what moves. And the body is a metaphor here. Your deeper brain trusts it more than anything you're told or anything you're scripted. When we do any kind of scripted drill, one of the people is assigned to lose. And your brain knows that. It knows that the reason the person lost was because they were supposed to lose, not because of anything you did. And that artificiality keeps things from being trusted. Play is one of the best ways to overcome that. So yeah, anything you can arrange, and sometimes you can manipulate this point where you can arrange them to discover something, which is pretty high order strategy or pretty high order teaching. But you can set up an experiment so they'll discover it. One of the things that's not in the book, and a huge tangent, and I hope you guys all know me well enough to know that I do tangents. There's most of the drills have a purpose, right? You're learning a certain skill or you're learning a certain pattern. But there are some drills that you do just to figure out what you're going to learn. And those are the ones that, and this is one of the things with play-based, or one of the things with, I don't know what will happen if I do this. So I'm going to go in and try it just to find out. And there's a lot of value in being in that experimental and experiential mind. And I think it's really cool that experiment and experience have the same root words.
Cool. So guys, those who just joined us, we are going to do one more question that we have listed, hopefully a quick one, and then we're going to start. There's going to be about 90 of you, or should be. So we would ask you to actually kill your killed your video just to keep it all controlled so we don't collapse into one. And then at the end, if you want to ask any questions, send them via the chat, but maybe directly to us, so not everyone gets distracted by that stuff. Cool. And at the end, we're going to choose a few, depends on the time. Cool. So hopefully enjoy it, but take into consideration when there is no video, there is a tendency of the mind kind of to do 10 things at a time. There is no value in multitasking, especially here when you have this kind of like the wisdom, how do you call it? The ball of wisdom. Sorry, Rory. I forgot the word. Yeah.
Way more wise ass than wise man.
Thank you. Because my teacher. Yes, let's use the fountain. Got upgraded to the fountain. Cool. Okay, so last question again from Andy. That was a quick one. Okay, you've mentioned elsewhere that it takes 7 encounters in your experience to begin accessing one's training in combat. In the book, you write about the split brain, where you are accessing your training on the subconscious level and doing something else like report writing on the conscious level. How many violent encounters does it take to get to the point where you can do that?
The numbers get squishy. The 3 to 5 counters before you can access training comes from, I'm drawing a blank. Ken Murray wrote Training at the Speed of Life. And I don't know that it's 3 to 5. It's because he was talking about shootouts and to me it feels like my first maybe 10 or 15 encounters were goat screws. I knew what to do, but making myself do it was significantly hard. One of the things that there's a sociologist named Lonnie Athens and a guy named Richard Rhodes. I know you don't have time to get these names down, so if you're taking notes, I'll slow down. Wrote a book called Why They Kill, which is about Lonnie Athens' research. The main point of the book was about becoming a violent person, but he had a bunch of Athens' other theories, and one of his is what he calls working off the blueprint. And that's why his working off the blueprint is no matter how many times you've practiced it, rehearsed it, done scenarios, your deeper brain still knows that you've never done it for real the first time, and it tends to half-ass anything you do for real the first time. First time a kid wants to jump in the deep end of the pool, they want to jump and hang on to the side. And so they do things halfway. The first time you go to ask someone out on a date, it's all that hesitation and weirdness, and you will have rehearsed it in your head 100 times, but still not there. The first time you're driving a car, you almost certainly killed it, no matter how many times you'd practiced how to work the shift and how to work the clutch. And so there's that one thing. So on that threshold level, that's one of the mechanisms for the low numbers and the training not really kicking in. At the high numbers, and the straight up answer is I don't know, because I didn't have this model and I wasn't taking numbers and counting them off. And it's I can do this now. It was one of those, I've been doing it for about 10 years, and the 300 number I used for encounters was 7 years in, so maybe 450, but I'm just purely guessing. But I would say it's about the same number of reps it took before you could drive a car and eat something and hold a conversation and do all 3 of them competently. I don't think this is a weird thing that only applies to violence. It's we all went through those stages of, through conscious incompetence and conscious competence and unconscious competence, and to that split brain. We've all done it driving. It's not a unique or weird thing. It's just that driving's fairly dangerous, and it takes a certain number of reps, and you get to the point where, as dangerous as it is, it's reflexive. And driving a car is significantly more dangerous than any physical skill that we do. You can accidentally kill someone with a car way easier than you could kill someone on purpose with your fist. So did that help at all?
Oh yeah, definitely. That was good. Cool. I think we're ready to start. The people will be still popping in, so we're going to mute ourselves, and then you are the boss.
Okay. I don't really have a plan for this, so keep the questions coming. Anna, if you have any, because I was kind of thinking this would almost be like an interview. I want to run into what I think intuition is and the model and why it's useful. So we can start with that if you just want me to jaw up here.
Sounds good. So guys, keep the question coming on the chat. And then, yeah, knowing you, you're going to do the intro for 15 minutes. 15 minutes time.
Okay, so a couple years ago, I woke up with this idea that I cannot think of anyone that had ever written a book, or sorry, I was just thinking it was an article of time. No one had written anything on training your intuition. Gavin DeBecker wrote The Gift of Fear, which is mostly about accessing and trusting your intuition, and it was hugely important. It's a really, really important book. And all the instructors were saying, you know, trust your gut, trust your instincts, trust your intuition. And we get that because there is a voice in the back of our heads, or a part of our brain, however you want to define it, that's really good at noticing what's going on and whispers stuff to us all the time. You know, that is a dangerous person. Don't go in there. And the hardest thing for most people is trusting it because they're afraid of looking silly. It just occurred to me that we're spending a lot of emphasis on trusting it, but nothing on developing it. And I, you know, just wanted to write an article, and the next thing I knew, I'm 10,000 words into this, and I wrote the entire book in what, 10 days. It was just purely flow. It was all is kind of cool because it feels like intuition wrote the book on intuition. And it's not a big deal in this sense. I think this is super basic. I think this is a grade school thing that 10 years from now will be obsolete because people will run with the ideas and make it better and better and better and better. And I think that what we as the martial arts community or whatever are going to be able to offer in the next generation in 10 or 20 years will be so much better than anything that I can just piece together now trying to kick around in my own head. So that was how it started, kind of another psychic vomit that just needed to come out. But the next part, going into what intuition means to me. And for most of us, it's just that, you know, that voice or hunches or something that swells up from your subconscious. And we tend to mystify it. To me, what we think of as the subconscious is actually the real brain. It's the real you. Most of the things that we think of in words, or anything that's in your head that you're aware of is in your head, is not actually thought. It's the byproduct or the product of thought. In the same way that the words on the computer screen are not what the computer is doing. It's just the part that's shared. And so the idea is to get to and spend as much time as possible and live as deeply as you can, not in the words on the screen, but in the actual process the computer is doing. So that's how I see, for my model's intuition, is letting the part of your brain that is actually running everything and quit trying to control it or fix it with words, because the words are too slow. For those of us, because almost everyone here is Krav, right? So that, I realize I can't see enough to see the nods. So everyone here is Krav, and part of the thing that we mess up in training, and is, I'm not particularly Krav, but all martial arts, is we try to tend to script things. We try to tend to, he does this, you do that. This is the right answer. And fighting of all the things in the world, you know, there are other things like language. That doesn't work super well. Everyone I know is worse at sparring when they try to think about sparring. The words in your head are always interferences. So having mechanisms to start practicing fighting without thinking, you know, without that constant conscious interruption. Is this the right thing? What are people thinking? Am I doing this right? What's sensei going to say? Those don't help you at all, ever. but getting to that trust that I've trained in this for so many years, it's just part of how I move now, let it go, and let that part, the part of your brain that actually is good at fighting, do the fighting, is hugely important to me. And the last thing I think I want to say in this little introduction is within the model, there's a model that came out with this, or in the book, and the basic model is at the lowest level, what I consider the deep brain. Something happens, you deal with it. So I'm thirsty, I drink. At the second level up, you're thirsty and you drink, but in the middle, you tell yourself, I'm thirsty. And that's okay because it's real, but it's not necessary. The third level, you're thirsty, so you want to drink and you think about your history, all the other times you've been thirsty, how thirsty you've been, whether this is really thirsty, are you thirsty for water, you're thirsty for beer, and then you'll make up your mind and you'll drink. But it slows everything down, and it's not always a good decision. The fourth level, where almost everyone lives, is you take all of those three and then you start adding all your imagination about what other people would think and what's acceptable. Is it too early to drink beer? Do I have to have water right now? How about? And sometimes you're thirsty and you don't even drink because you're so worried about all this other bullshit, which is absolutely irrelevant. So the point of the book, the point of intuition for me, is to spend as much time as possible to practice living at that level where when you're thirsty, you just drink something and you don't consciously think about it at all. If you have to protect yourself, you just protect yourself and you don't go into all of these weird issues, which is what makes people freeze. So that's what it is to me. Annie, you got anything from there?
Okay, cool. Yeah, we've got a few questions. It's weirdly they're not popping on the computer, so I might be kind of freezing myself for a second. But that means so trying to be very much in the present, because those things, like that, if you start worrying about what people will think, this is almost like projecting to the future or what happened before. So it's just being in the present, really. That would be the living in the brain, kind of.
Yeah, there are a lot of models for it. So the living in the present, being in the now, is a model. A lot of people have been trying to describe this mind because it's so effective for a long time. So and those descriptions, living in the now, being at one with yourself, the stilling the voices in your head, which is what almost all meditation is about. I think everyone's trying to describe the same thing. I'm describing it in the way that makes sense to my head. It doesn't make it right. It's another model that might be useful to some people. But that the living in the now, and that doesn't mean that you're rejecting your history. That doesn't mean, the child's brain is aware, but we aren't going to reject our knowledge because of that. We're internalizing the knowledge and letting it play out without the questioning. It's one, I have a lot of beliefs. One of the beliefs is generally the deep brain knows better about what's true. It's harder to con, it's harder to fool than all the voices in our head. Those are very easy to manipulate, and they get manipulated a lot.
Yeah, cool. That makes sense. I think you guys are sending questions to my phone. So John is going to send you, so it's to everyone. Which one do we send it to then? Oops, this was. It's Anna Martinson. Okay. Yeah, Anna Martinson is the host. Otherwise, I'll just check. Okay, so let's get on this question there.
Okay, so that's the first chat that I actually saw, so it's good. So one of the exercises in the book, if anyone wants to do this, it'll take a couple of minutes. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's and to give credit for the source, this is actually was taught to me as a psychological first aid technique. It was a way to calm down people in crisis. But I use it a lot. To give you a little bit of background, one of the things, in order for your intuition to be clean, in order to make things work out, you have to get good inputs. And then you have to understand them and not mess with them too much and not let them go toxic. So one of the things about living in that deep brain is as much as possible living in your senses. Again, feel thirsty, you drink. That thirst is a sensation. You have to be aware of it. So one of the exercises I like, you guys can all just relax, get as comfortable as you can. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. If you have headphones in, take one of them out. And then relax, just breathe. Don't make this anything weird or special. But I just want you to internally name 5 things that you hear. Okay. Right now, I'm hearing one of our chickens just laid an egg. I can hear that. I'm hearing a little bit of hiss from the headphones. I'm hearing my breath in my nose. Okay. The dishwasher is going in the back. And my wife is typing away on her computer, or she just stopped. So find 5 things that you hear. Keep your eyes closed and 5 things that you feel. So I can feel my feet against the hardwood floor. I can feel the weird material on the shirt on my back. It's not cotton, it's some new fiber. I feel my teeth against my tongue. I can feel the earbuds. I can feel the way the chair is sitting. So 5 things that you feel. The hardest is 5 things that you smell, and I probably can't distinguish 2 right now. It's allergy season here, so I'm a little stuffed up. But I can definitely smell my coffee. There's a bouquet of flowers on the table. Most of them are not scented, but the roses are. I can smell those. And I can smell the water in the jar. I can smell my soap from this morning. And I can smell my scent under the soap. So 5 things. 5 sounds, 5 touch, feeling sensations, 5 smells. Smells the hardest because you guys can put your headphones back in and snap out of it. Smell is the hardest because we don't have a language for it, but it's also the one that wires deepest to your brain. It can trigger a lot of memories if you get the right smell. If you get a smell associated with really traumatic event, the smell will bring it back way faster. I've said this before, but there's one brand of soap that I can't stand because it smells too much like fresh human brains. And that always triggers a very specific memory when someone has that bar of soap. But this is something you can do it as a meditation like we just did, but I actually encourage you just every so often to just stop and feel, just stop and listen, just stop and smell. We're so used to our eyes, and our eyes are so wired to our part of the brain that thinks in words, that sometimes just cutting yourself off in that, whether you do blindfolded infighting is another thing that I use for this, but just smell people. Don't be obvious about it because it creeps them out. But smell people, smell houses. And that's one of the, how many of you have walked in a house and you just didn't like it because of the smell, or walked into a place and you loved it because of the smell? And it's almost never conscious. So making it conscious makes it a little bit better. So smell, feel, and not just, the hard touches, I'm bouncing my elbow, but the changes in air pressure in the room when someone opens the door, or the window opens, or when the weather is about to change because the wind shifts. On a cloudy day like today, you can feel where the sun is when you can't see it if you need to know what your directions are or what time it is. But you have to actually play with it. So for me, that's the first thing. Intuition is spending as much time as deeply in your senses as possible without overthinking it. Okay. Good. So we got a question from Colin. Intuition to do the right thing is stronger than instinct to do the wrong thing. That's not as much of a problem as people think it is. And this is, everyone has a dark side. Most people's dark side are about as big and dangerous as a Chihuahua, as a really, really tiny dog. Yeah, Chihuahua's a dog. It's about this big. It's totally harmless, but they tend to think that they're big dogs and act like they're big dogs, and they aren't. We're afraid of our dark side. The best example that I have for this is a friend of mine who, when he was a kid, they were out hunting, and one of the people he was hunting with shot in his general direction without looking. So the bullet went by him, and he was scared and angry and just felt this rage building up, and he wanted to shoot back. And he tells this story many decades later as how he knows that he's a really, really dangerous person with a really dangerous dark side because he felt so much anger. I'm listening to the story and going, you felt that much anger and you did nothing. You're fine. You're incredibly civilized. I'm way more worried about this someone that feels a little bit of annoyance and is willing to slit a throat. That's a dangerous person. So don't be afraid of your dark side. It's not as big as you think it is, and I hope that doesn't hurt your feelings. People tend to do the right things. People tend not to be assholes. And we all know people who are assholes, and some of them are successful, but the majority aren't, because it just creates so much friction in your life. If you're a dick, people don't want to help you do stuff. They don't want to see you get ahead. They don't want to. It just makes everything slower and more horrible. So for most people, and if this doesn't apply to you, you know it because you can look at the wreckage in your life. But for most people, you don't have to worry about this instinct to do harm. You don't. There is an instinct to be selfish, which is maybe not to care as much as you should, but to actively do harm just for the hell of it is actually pretty rare, and usually has to be something that was rewarded early in childhood. But you have friends, you have people that you love. That is part of your deeper brain, and that's actually your default. That's one of the reasons why it's so hard. Going back to the self-defense thing, one of the reasons why it's so hard to give people emotional permission to defend themselves is because their instinct default is, if this is a human in front of me, they're one of my humans. So, okay, Phil wants to talk about situational awareness. So I would say that intuition, the way most people teach, okay, in a standard self-defense class, people will talk about situational awareness. They'll say, maintain your situational awareness. And that's it. And that's useless. That's like, pay attention. They don't tell you to pay attention to what? There's no use there. And kind of the same thing with intuition, in the sense that they say, trust your intuition, but they don't tell you what intuition feels like or how to know if yours is trustworthy, because not everyone's is. We all know people have really bad instincts. So how do you find that out? How do you fix it? So they're very, very closely related. A lot of times the situational awareness is conscious because you're looking for stuff, which breaks it down from the deep brain. But you practice that until the deep brain starts to own it, and then they become very closely intertwined or entwined. I'm not sure which is the right word. So exercises for situational awareness, and I break this up in levels, and I'm not going to go into too much detail here because I'm still working on the beta class, which, if we're off lockdown, the first actual physical class is going to be in 2 months. There's passive and active intelligence gathering. So doing senses work, working from the stuff we just did about listening and smelling. So senses work. Interpretation is, what does your situational awareness tell you about what's going on? And there's a bunch of things here. We talk about cold reading. I don't know if I've done that with any of you before. But the less drills are harder to do in class, or something that we usually go out and do field trips on. But the things I look for is general physicality, how well people move. Tells you a lot about them. It tells you about old injuries, tells you if they used to be a fighter, tells You know, if they're nursing something out, if they're clumsy, if they aren't comfortable in their own body, and you see this right away. It takes a little bit of practice for some people, and when people are really good at it, they can diagnose old injuries by watching your walk. The other thing that I look at is eyes, what people look at, what they don't look at, and what they try not to look at. And that tells you a lot. The third big one for me is clothing, because no one gets dressed accidentally. People are dressing either to send a message or to blend in. When they're dressing to send a message, it's usually fairly obvious. And I'll kick back, there's almost always trying to cover an insecurity. The ones that are dressing to blend in, look for who they are dressing to blend in with. And you get some of the best information when we do the drill. Most of the people show up in their martial arts stuff, even if we're at a mall, because they're trying to blend in with a group that they're going to be with. And a handful of people have their, I'm going to the mall dress up. I have my middle-aged tourist costume that I wear a lot. So that for second level of situation is interaction between groups. And that's looking at how close people stand, the little subtle status signals that they give that say that's the guy that's running this show. Next level up from that is patterns of movements. Where are the places people walk in certain places on the sidewalk? If you go to a park, there'll be trampled grass or paths of mud in some place where people walk all the time, and other places where people don't walk. So you start being aware of what those are and why they're like that. And then you start looking at when they change. If there's a well-traveled place that no one's going, there's something going on. So that those are just some of the drills I used to get explicit. One other thing about situational awareness, those are the passive, those are the things you observe. I don't think anyone has really dug into active intelligence gathering, which is how to find out who you ask, how to find out what's going on. And active intelligence gathering can start with what we used to call a map recon, which is take a look at the way wherever you're going to be is laid out, look at the map, figure out where the exits are, the entrances, the danger zones, the places where bad guys could do bad things. And then when you're actually physically in the place, who do you ask? What are the questions you ask? How do you get people talking without them knowing that they're talking is the elicitation level. So yeah, there's a whole bunch of stuff that can actively be taught. And I'm a little miffed that most of the self-defense world just says, maintain your situational awareness, and then doesn't tell you any of this super basic shit. So hopefully that got you going, Phil. Okay.
I ask a question from Ricardo because he's sending it privately so you can't see it. The first one was regarding intuition in Becker. How can you overcome the argument of certain people that listening to gut feelings is inherently bad? At least in my country, it is often regarded this way. And you guys can unmute yourself, so if you want to add anything to that question, Ricardo, feel free.
Okay, I didn't get that question because she sent it to you instead of to everyone. So this is a matter of will, in that there are too many people that want other human beings to be weak. When you feel nervous or when you feel afraid, you want everyone around you controlled and weak, because then there's less to be afraid of. And I think you have to recognize that when people are saying, oh, don't trust your gut, don't trust your intuition, they're trying to manipulate you. And they're trying to manipulate you into not owning your own strength. And that's, if I understood the question correctly, that's my response to it is fuck those guys. They're trying to keep me weak for some reason. They want me easy to manipulate. They want me to trust them instead of myself. And right there, that's a problem. So if you're in a place, in a culture where someone tells you not to trust your own eyes, but to trust theirs, They want to own you on some level.
But can I elaborate on that?
Go for it.
All right, because the question really was, how can I convince other people of that? Because I tend to trust my own instincts, but a lot of people in the Netherlands, they have real problems with that, and they have this term for a gut feeling, which is basically a bad thing, right? It's the lower part of your whatever your being. It's not the rational thinking part. It's regarded as not to be trusted. So that was, yeah.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. That's actually an easier question to answer. One of the things about integrating it, and we do this, we've done the legal part of self-defense with the articulation exercise, because one of the elements of a bad encounter is that you're going to make a very, very fast decision, usually with partial information, and then you're going to be required to explain it afterwards when the police show up, or when the attorneys show up, or when the detectives show up. But at some point, you're going to have to explain why you used your self-defense skills to put someone down. Because the decision is so fast, it tends to be subconscious. One of the things that I found in my experience, and I have no reason to doubt, is that the decision that you made under that stress in that moment tends to be a very, very good decision, but we're crappy at explaining it. And so the actual exercise I would like you guys to use is, whenever you get that hunch, whenever you do have an intuitive feeling, stop for a second, run it through, play back in your head what triggered it, find the triggers. Once you get the triggers, or once you can explain it consciously, then it no longer, when someone said, I have a bad feeling about this, if they say, well, so, you can sit there and go, wait, the guy was trying not to look at me. He was looking at a body part, but he didn't want to get caught looking at the body part. He was edging closer. The lines around his lips were getting white, which means his tension was going up, his adrenaline going up, and he kept one hand hidden. It's like there was some shit going on. So I would say to that one, if you can practice explaining it, then no one needs to know that it was a gut decision. And this also increases as you get better at explaining it, you get better at observing the clues. So it creates this feedback loop that makes you both more observant and better able to explain it. Is that a better answer?
Yeah, great answer. Thank you.
Cool. Okay, there's one that came up from Steve Reed. So evidently I'm getting some of the chats and Anna's getting the rest. So would you say that intuition is based on life experience or inbuilt in some sort of human primeval instinct? Also, is intuition something that can be honed and improved? And that, in a lot of ways, that's the core. For my definition, intuition is everything you've internalized, the stuff you don't have to remember to do all the time. So it's hugely a product of your history, of your background, the stuff you experienced as a child, the stuff you're experiencing now. As it gets internalized, it becomes part of your intuition. One of the first question we talked about, the reason we like play and having people discover, is because the deeper part of the brain says, this is mine because I found it. I didn't get told from someone else, so I have to question, doubt, and decide what I think about that person. So history is really good. I would say, and this, I could be completely wrong about this, that we have an inborn or genetic tendency to do this, but the computer hardware is inborn, the software is affected by history. So I'm hoping that makes a little more sense on how much is inborn. It's incredibly malleable. So there are very few truly human instincts, stuff that you don't need to be taught at some level. And those tend to be deep. Because of that, the intuitive part, because it's based on history, it can be honed and it can be improved all the time. One of one of the things that we talked about, because one of the questions is, can you trust your intuition? And not everyone can all the time. If you were raised in a really toxic environment, if your parents were narcissistic, violent assholes, you learned your clues about behavior from broken people. And one of two things tends to happen. You either tend to get really good at reading people, because you're reading behind all the lies that they're throwing out, or you get really bad at reading people because you assume that everyone is like those broken people that you learned from. And this isn't an issue of your, I talk about it as toxic intuition, but what I'm really looking at there is that most people need to recalibrate. If you know that you're coming from a place that's not like the place you're in, then you recalibrate. You learn what levels of deception are normal, and start adjusting for that. Remembering that your history is not absolutely controlling, but your history feeds your intuition. And this again, going back to that fourth order interaction where your brain is worrying about what people will say and what people will think. If you've learned what people think from people that don't think normally, if everyone that you grew up with was a manipulative asshole, then your assumption is that all people are manipulative assholes. And that has to be relearned. You have to learn how to identify them when they happen, but you also have to recognize that most people are not like that. You just happen to grow up in a shitstorm, and all of your instincts are calibrated for a shitstorm. And again, that's a superpower as long as you can recalibrate it. So, okay, Chris wants to know about integrating it. The observational games, there are things I do. It's like getting into the senses you can integrate. That's why I like all the blindfolded work that we do. Asking people to answer questions. There's some drills for splitting your brain. One of the ones I think we talked about in the instructor course. Next time you're sparring, spar with whoever you're sparring with while coaching two other people. So you're dealing with this guy, but you're giving them advice. That's a really good drill for getting you into that part where your body, that's the part of your body brain that's good at fighting, handles that piece, and the part of your brain that sucks at fighting is actually pretty good at coaching, so it handles that piece. So it's actually a trick to get the interfering part of your brain, give it something to do and put it out of the way. So that's one. The explain yourself drill is like in the middle of anything. It's like freeze. You know, the police just showed up, explain what you did. Why was that legal? What were the circumstances? And get them in the habit of explaining that. Yeah, the focus workshop format. I do homework, and part of that homework, especially with that active intelligence gathering we were talking about, is go start, the most basic is go start a conversation with a stranger, find out what they do for a living, where they were born, and where they live now, and don't give up any of the same information about yourself. And then not giving up the information is the hardest part of that. But get people used to reading people, people used to talking to people, even interrogating them without them knowing it. So. Ricardo wants to talk about the adrenaline dump. Okay, and Lee Morrison. There is a Lee Morrison, a Lee Morris, a Steve Morrison, and a Steve Morris, and I have never got them straightened out in my head. I am not sure which is which, and it's so, I don't know. But the adrenaline dump is one of those things that we both, if you don't acknowledge it, it can really bite you on the ass, but in general, it exists for a good thing. You bleed less. Your core muscles and your big muscle groups get stronger. It tends to hyper focus you. I think the thing that the one adrenaline effect, and it's not always adrenaline, a lot of it's psychological, is the freeze is what people are worried about. Because that's one of the things going back to our, before we were even humans, if something with big teeth showed up, it's like you freeze because predators key on movement. It also works socially, because a lot of times you got a guy that wants to hurt you, but he wants an excuse to hurt you. And when you freeze and say nothing, it's hard for him to find the hook. And I think most of you have stories about someone that, you know, and the next day they're going, I should have done something. It's like, no, doing nothing was exactly the right thing, because you would have got your ass kicked. So that, but overcoming this, the only people I know that have really, for want of a better word, overcome adrenaline are the ones that got so burnt out on adrenaline inducing situations that they, you know, I don't know whether the gland actually burned out or it just became a job. And that's actually not a good thing. That's freaking horrible. Almost everything that you think of as joy involves a certain amount of adrenaline. And the world gets really, really gray and really, really boring when it does burn out. So my best advice, I've got two for controlling adrenaline in the moment. There are a bunch of breathing exercises you can do if you have some time to plan. But the two in the moment, one is super easy and effective, and that's, we talked earlier about how smell wires to a deeper part of your brain. Smell the person that you're fighting. That, for me, flips me to an older, more ruthless part of my brain. For me, that's a gateway to get out of the thinking and into it. And it triggers the predatory part, not the prey part, for some reason. So again, I don't know how useful some of this is for other people, but that's one of the most powerful. The second sounds weirder, but works, and that's to not label it. Someone gets in your face, someone, you know, challenges you, or someone attacks you, and you get the adrenaline dump. The second you label it is when it becomes an emotion. This is my opinion. But if you get adrenaline dump and you go, oh my God, I'm scared, then it becomes fear, and you only have your fear affordances. You can only do what scared people do. You get the exact same chemical dump and you can call it rage, and you will get all of the things that an angry person can do, but none of the other things. If you don't label it, or you just call it adrenalized, it doesn't close down your options. You can do anything you want with it. So in the moment, those are the only two tools that I trust, is the power of not naming and smelling in a fight. So, and also if you're smelling your breathing, which is, a lot of people hold their breath when they're scared. So. I could just sit here doing things with my eyebrows for a while. So.
Can I add a question from Andy? So he was organized and he sent it over before. How about, that's going to be a long one. Are we ready? You recommend learning.
It's strange. I don't get any, I can't hear any better when I get closer, but I keep trying.
You recommend learning through play in the book. As self-defense instructors, we might find that our trainees are more goal-oriented. They want to learn how to defend themselves in the shortest possible time and move on with living their lives. Retention can be lower than in a traditional martial arts school. Our students might not be with us for as long as we might like to. So are there situations where you might not rely on play and absolutely should start out by insisting that students do things in a rigid way in case they don't discover things by themselves quickly enough?
And I'll say no. And I may be partial or biased on this, but playing for a short time makes you better than scripted stuff for a long time. And we've done, I don't know how many experiments, when John Bullock, which most of you know, the first time that we did the instructor development course where we're talking about learning by play, his response was, I see what you're trying to do here, but I don't think it would work as a business model because they would get too good too quickly. what he's found since he started doing it is it works great as a business model because it's more fun. They tend to stay longer. So they're staying longer and they're learning faster. The thing with any kind of rigid teaching, the thing with memorization, is that it relies on the bad guy doing everything you want him to do. And that's not going to happen. I have a bunch of context for this, or a bunch of ways that I try to explain this. So if any of you are actors, generally martial arts are like acting, but fighting is like improv, and they're separate skills. When you're working in a second language, if you just memorize, does anyone know anyone who got good just by memorizing the grammar and the words? Or did they have to go out and argue and talk and play and do all the things that language is for? Fighting especially, self-defense and fighting especially, is a chaotic environment. And the only way to get good at it is to acknowledge the chaos. You can make people more comfortable by telling them that, well, I have an answer for everything, and you learn this and this is the answer. You learn this and this is the answer. You learn this and this is the answer. And you can make them very, very confident, but you actually make them less competent. So again, my opinion, I could be completely wrong about this, but I'm getting closer and closer to believing that the traditional he does this, you do that teaching actually is more harmful than no training at all. Becca wants to know about the difference between instinct and intuition. And this is one of the places where the language gets weird. So our actual question is, I found that training Krav Maga is instinctively built on using your reflexes to turn them into attacks. Would you say there's a distinct difference between intuition and instinct? If so, which is the most useful in martial arts? So there are three things here, and the language tends to be really fuzzy. The way most people use it is actually very technical. So reflexes first. Reflexes are things that don't go all the way to your brain. They go, the lower level ones go to a place in your lumbar spine. The higher level ones come up here, and there's no cognition in them. Or if it's a reflex, it can't be changed, it can't be altered, it can't be undone. So this, when the doctor taps your knee with a hammer and your leg kicks, it's going to happen. Those are the true reflexes. Instincts are the things that people do that they don't have to be taught. And I think there are two levels for this. There are very, very few things that are truly instinctual. Humans are afraid of falling, and they're afraid of loud noises. We're born that way. The other fears are learned. But there are also instinctive predilections. If a kid's not exposed to language at a very, very specific time in their life, they will become incapable of learning languages. So we have the instinctive or inborn predilections way more than we have instinctive or inborn skills or actions. And then we have things that can look like reflexes, which are conditioned responses. And a lot of things, when we say that we're weaponizing our reflexes, we're actually weaponizing conditioned responses. And this is one of the things, it's kind of circular logic, but if you can alter them, then they weren't reflexes. So getting that language out of the way. Most of the, anyway, so to answer Becca's question, I would say that instincts for fighting, the way we talk about it, don't really, not the same. All humans can fight the way that all humans can swim. Okay, we call it dog paddling. If you take a totally untrained person, throw them in the water, they'll do this. And they'll get somewhere and they won't drown until they get tired. So, and that's what most people do. They also have that level of instinct for fighting. It's refining it is what we do. And then to make it what I call intuitive is not just refining it, but getting your hindbrain to trust it enough that that seems like the thing to do under stress, not the dog paddling. That makes sense? Because I can see 3 people up right now and none of them are nodding, so I don't know what's going on. Okay, Anna smiled, so I guess we're okay for now. Oh, John's here. Ricardo wants to talk about emotional after effects when you seriously hurt someone or worse. I don't have a lot of trauma associated with past events. And the things I think that are important are having a good social network, people that you care about, people that you love. Recognizing that, and this is important. If you're an asshole, none of this will apply to you. But recognizing that you didn't get up that morning thinking, I'm going to hurt this guy. That guy put you in a situation where you had no choice. And being very, very clear. If you're defending yourself, self-defense law, you're doing it because you had no choice. If you had no choice, that means the bad guy made the choices. He didn't have to attack you, but he did. He could have given up at any point before you injured him, but he didn't. Everything in there was his choice. So those are the two things that I think have given me the most armor from psychological after effects. The other thing is, especially if you're in a career where this happens a lot, silence is a killer. I've heard too many officers go with, well, I don't want to talk about what happened with my family because they don't need that stuff in their head. I'll keep it in my head. And that's just stupid. Those are the guys that have the divorces and the ulcers and the heart attacks. And the reason it's stupid is not because, you know, talking to Cammie about Ivory Soap and Fresh Brains, it's going to put something a little bit in her head, but it's just a story to her. It's not something that she's going to wake up in a cold sweat from. And more importantly, if you go through something shitty and you don't talk about it, I guarantee you the people that care about you will be imagining something more shitty than actually happened. That it's more traumatic not to talk than it is to talk. So those are me for how to deal with the emotional after effects. That's, I have excellent people in my life. I have people in my life that can look at them and go, you know what? If the world can produce this, if the world can produce Cammie, then on the whole, it's a good place, no matter what human piece of viciousness I had to deal with that day. John has we know someone, you know how you get shorthand, you get code words. So John wants me to talk about defining good as knowing it, nothing else. And this is one of the things that we have recalibrating your students. And part of the thing is how to measure how good your students are. So we have the levels or the black belts or whatever. And for the most part, it's bullshit. There's no real way to measure someone's ability to break the rules. And almost everything in self-defense is about being surprising. It's about breaking the rules. And you'll see almost any instructor that if their student surprises them, pulls out something they didn't see, then they'll punish the student. And that's stupid for self-defense. You want them to be able to trick you. You want them to be able to con you. That you want them thinking out of the box all the time. So one of the things is when you start thinking about good, or that's the right way or the correct way, it's almost always the wrong metric for a couple of the reasons. One is that if you're judging by how it looked, that's irrelevant. Fighting is profoundly kinesthetic. It's all about how it feels. And you can have the most pretty, perfect karate form in the world, but if you can't knock someone on their ass, it doesn't matter. And you can have something that looks just butt ugly and it knocked the guy down. That's a good technique. It's about what it did, not about how it looked. But when we're measuring, almost everyone just has their eyes to measure. That's what they use. So that's the first reason. Second, there's a philosopher, I can't remember the name, but said something that I found profound is, in an infinite universe, you're wrong. If the universe is infinite, there's no right way to do anything because there's always something better. So fucking get over it. You're wrong. And working with that, it becomes not about, did I do it right? Because if you ever do it right, you're done. You're done. You can't get better, but you can always get better. So it becomes, did I do it well? Can I do it better next time? And this, and this John wrote like one sentence and it has like this hours and hours of conversation behind it. But how many of you have heard of Dunning-Kruger? Dunning-Kruger were two, I believe they were psychologists that came out with this paper that blew everyone away. And we all kind of knew this instinctively. But have you ever noticed how smart people think they're dumb and dumb people think they're smart? So they actually meant that. And it's a fact. Dumb people think that they're smart. Smart people think that they're dumb. The thing is that if you think you're dumb, you're going to be continuously working to be smarter. But if you think you're smart, you can sit back and relax because you're smart and you're going to become dumb even if you aren't now. So this goes into the, if you think you're good, you're done. So start pushing your students away from the good-bad dichotomy, away from the, am I doing it right or wrong? As, you know, this is a growth thing. Am I growing? Did I grow today? Am I better at this than I was yesterday? Well, how will I be better tomorrow? And just run it through there. Okay, Fraser Bishop wrote, very cool. Using intuition to teach children is better than a rigid structure. Play fighting a child really sharpens your intuition and instinct as they do the unexpected. Would you agree, have the same experience? And it's like, and this is brilliant. Playing with kids instead of trying to strap them down and force them to tell you what you want to hear is obviously a better way to do it. Our schools are almost designed to destroy creativity, to keep people from learning anything outside the box. But what Fraser said that was brilliant is it's also better for you because you learn when you're playing too. And kids are surprising. It's there's a study. I should have all these studies on hand right now so I can click them up. But there's a study that tracked within the different types of intelligence, there's a creative intelligence. And almost all children, over 90%, score in the genius mode before they start school. And that percentage drops the longer they're in education. To me, that's a horrible thing. Lynn's talking about confidence. So some of my students have asked about how to build confidence in their self-defense skills. Do you have any thoughts on how to do this? And also, to what extent is building confidence in their skills a good thing? Too much confidence is not necessarily being a good thing. This is a fine line. There's arrogance, there's bravery, there's confidence. There's a lot of things that are close, but not really the same. So first, overconfidence and avoiding that. I almost always think that that's the wrong question. When you invest in situational awareness, when they know about the consequences, I find them less likely to jump into dangerous situations. There's always this fear that if I make someone overconfident, they're going to do things that are riskier than they should. And I don't find that as necessarily to be true, because those situations, if they want that, they're going to go into a profession where they get it. When someone, sorry, I made the mistake of reading something that just came up on chat, which totally destroys my chain of thought. So I think you can trust your students' intelligence for the most part, not to worry about them getting overconfident. And once you lay out that as good as you are, it's still dangerous. As good as you are, there will still be consequences. As good as you are, and keeping that choice, or keep emphasizing that choice. If you're going to get involved in a third-party intervention, you know, you can't know all the information, so be prepared for that. It can go bad very quickly. Not one of the other things that I do is I also don't present anything as answers. They're tools. And this is about percentage points. There's no such thing as 100% survivability. There's no level of good that you can be where there's not something out there that can crush you. So it's one of those, being aware that no matter how bad you are, you can still get unlucky. You know, even if you're the biggest and the strongest and the fastest and the most skilled and have all the information walking in, you can still get unlucky. So teaching them to respect how bad these situations can be, I think allows for common sense to kick in. But building confidence in their self-defense skills. There's a couple of things that work. Well, there's more than that. One of the things that's hard, though, is that we create environments where it's safe. Because if it's not safe and you cripple all your students, then you don't have any students. And within that safe environment, they can't know how dangerous they are. So stupid as it sounds, when someone has really bad confidence issues, I teach them how to break a brick. Breaking a brick is super easy. It's just a martial arts trick. It's not a big deal. But the blow on confidence of, oh my fucking God, I can break a brick, tends to really help some people. One of the other things you can do is to film them, you know, right when they start, and then so they can see how much growth they've had. Because that's another thing, is you tend not to feel your own growth. And if you're with the same cohort, you're training with the same people, you tend to be growing at roughly the same speed, so you also don't get a comparator. The other thing is to respect and praise them when they tag you as the instructor. If I take a good hit from a student, it's like, oh my God, that was awesome. If you hadn't been holding back because we were training, I would be laid out right now. Well done. One other, and this is a psychological trick that I think all instructors should be good at, is you've got to pay attention to micro impressions and know how to anchor them. And what I mean by that is going back to a student tags you or they make contact. If you watch their micro expressions, there's one moment, and it's joy. It's this massive joy. Every animal likes being powerful, and they have that expression of power. And then they go to that fourth order thing where they start worrying about, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Oh, and then this shame and guilt start hanging in. That's where you get to, I'm sorry, are you okay? I didn't mean to do that. Is that familiar to everybody, that conversation? So what I really encourage you to do is go, no, that's bullshit. In that moment, right when you tagged me, your eyes lit up, you felt the shot of joy. That is the real emotion. That's what you should be feeling. So I want you to feel that. I want you to anchor into that. That's the important thing. This other stuff, the guilt, these are voices in your head. I want you to hit me. Otherwise, I'm a terrible instructor. If I can't give you the skills to hit me, I suck. So run with this. Make me proud. You make me proud by making me pay. So does everyone get that anchoring idea? There's joy in this, or we wouldn't be doing it. So you have to anchor them to the joy. So those Lynn, those are the tools I have or some of the tools I have for building confidence in students. But building competence is the thing. Make them good, and then aware that they're good, and that works.
Oh wait, don't read a question. I have one.
All right.
So, would you mind asking Rory about the role that self-defense plays in dealing with domestic abuse, and if he has some thoughts about educating such students?
Yeah. Domestic stuff is really, really hard to put into the self-defense world in general, because in the self-defense world, we want simple solutions to simple problems. We want a stranger jumping out of the bushes and you beat the stranger down, and there's a, we don't want to think about the trial. We don't want to think about what the police are going to say. We just want to have a really simple bad guy and a really simple solution. And we walk away knowing we're the good guy, and nothing follows. With domestics, it's so much bigger than that, because it's not about a bad guy stranger and a good guy victim. It's about a relationship, and sometimes a huge relationship. It's not, it's not like two people get married and they're the only two people there. It's what if your mom likes the abuser more than your mom likes you? What if, you know, all of your friends are shared and they don't all agree on who's actually the bad guy here? What if you're dependent on your abuser financially? What if you're dependent on your abuser's friends emotionally? What if you have kids? And this just gets into this huge, it's a mess. And within that self-defense of, you know, well, just hit the guy, teach him a lesson. That's no, or just leave. It's like, that's not always possible. It's not always easy. So this is, as an instructor, I talk about it as honestly as I can. I acknowledge the complexity of it. My goal and my goal for everything in this is to make people strong enough and aware of their strength enough that they can make their own choices. There's a saying that I read a while ago that if we make our children strong enough, our enemies will exhaust themselves trying to make chains strong enough to hold them. Okay, I want people to be so strong that they have the option of terminating the relationship, terminating the person, leaving the relationship, or changing the relationship. I want them to have the strength and the tools for all of those options and any other options they can imagine, and trust themselves enough to make their own choices for their own purposes. And I realize that that's almost a non-answer, in the sense, as self-defense instructors, we want a really easy answer for this, but it's not. It's a relationship. And this goes to any of what some people call the gray areas, you know, the places where someone's doing something that's not, it's not actually assault, so you can't legally defend yourself, but they're definitely being assholes and being creepy. So how do you deal with that? And it all breaks down to being strong enough and trusting your strength enough that you can make your own choices and your own decisions. And those decisions can range from the legal to the social to the physical. We aren't all qualified to teach all levels of those. I know I'm not. But those are the answers that exist. There's not a simple, you know, pop them in the throat and walk away.
Cool. Are we happy to answer that one from John, the last one?
There's one before that from Chris that I'd like to hit.
Oh.
Which is about balance, developing a solid striking grappling foundation students without overloading them with techniques and causing analysis paralysis. Okay, so Chris, this boils down to a lot of the teaching methodology and the play-based teaching methodology. We have so being really specific in why I trust this so much. At the police academy, we had, I believe, 40 or 60 hours of hand-to-hand training for everyone there. And it was very technique-based. You memorize the techniques. In practice, it didn't work that well. And at one point, we had a year where, let's see, a third of our officers were assaulted and 10% were hospitalized in a single year. So they pulled Mac and me to design a program. Basically, we had to get our people up to speed, but we had 16 hours to do it instead of 40. We were dealing with all ages, all body types, old injuries. And the method that we came up with in 16 hours reduced our injuries by 30%. So I feel pretty solid about this. But it was all play-based, and the pattern, it's in principles-based instruction if you want, but really quick is you have a game, because it's play-based, whatever. We have a game. And one step is the game that I use with people I don't know well. infighting flow with people I know a little bit better, infighting randori with my guys. But have this game. And the purpose of that game is to integrate whatever you do. Do it by game. And we take out and break them down into what we call skill builds. And these can either be based on a principle or based on not a technique, but a class of techniques. So this breaks down into how you can chunk the information so it gets into students' heads faster. Some of you have seen the joint lock class, which is the cleanest that I've got. But for striking, the basics of striking are power generation, targeting, and don't hurt your hand. And those are 3 things that can be taught to a certain level of confidence very quickly. So you take them out, you do a skill build. If you have a specific game for the specific skill, you play that game for a while, and then you go back into the general game. And same. You just keep that revolving circle going. So general game, skill build, specific game, general game. Skill build, specific game, general game. And so one of the things about teaching this way, because within that 16 hours that we had our officers, one was a 1-hour block on joint locks. And by chunking it right, we had officers in real fights, improvising joint locks under pressure because they played with it. They discovered it. They didn't know the name of a single joint lock, but they could make up some stuff that was pretty explicit, would have been considered advanced in traditional martial arts. And they were making it up under pressure. This play-based is ridiculously powerful. So let's see. And again, I believe that play is the shortcut to that unconscious competence, because you don't have anything memorized, you don't have anything to think about. So okay, John has another one about grading systems and training, and there's I wrote an article about it a little while back, but basically there are 2, maybe 3 types of grading systems that I consider. There's demos and there's ordeals. My jiu-jitsu training was tough, but my Mokuroku test, our teacher certificate test, was actually easy. And I was a little miffed because one of my friends was going through his Kajikembo, and that was going to be 8 hours of people kicking the shit out of him. And I was young and dumb enough. It's like, I want 8 hours of people kicking the shit out of me. But the purposes were different. So I asked Sensei, why is our test so light? And he goes, because you already earned it in class. I've been watching you, every day for years. You've got this. This is just something we do so that you can bring your friends and family in, so they know why you've been missing every evening for so long, and look cool. This is just a photo op, it's just a demo. You earned your rank in the class. You can also do the ordeal classes, and this is where it goes in. It can be a huge skill build when you make them so tough that they're ordeals. They're one of those, bring them right to the edge of exhaustion, right to the edge of what they're capable of. And that's a huge, it's a huge ego boost for them. And it also becomes a huge bonding moment within the organization, within the test. We've all been through this. And now you're one of the secret club that survived it. So they both work for testing models. But I think for building confidence, absolutely the ordeal model can really help. Okay, Ricardo has something about teaching children how to channel their aggression. I don't teach kids because I use way too much foul language and horrible examples, and I don't necessarily want kids exposed to me. So I will throw out one thing I've written, and there's a book called Values for the New Millennium, or A New Millennium. It's an excellent book on ethics, but one of the things that Robert Humphreys was the author. One of the things that his sons did when they were running a school for children that the regular school system had given up on as being too aggressive, he found out that if they gave them hard physical training, and he was having them box, so teaching aggressive kids to box seems like a bad idea. but he would teach them to box and then assign them to protect smaller kids. And they got the same ego boost that they used to get out of being a bully, out of being a protector. So I have not done this myself. Can't back it up, but that seems to be what he showed because they were doing it as a pilot study. And it seemed to drop the bullying almost to zero. Yeah. Okay, Andrew wants to talk about, I'm sorry, Chris, I'm skipping your thing. It's like, yeah, be fun. At what age should someone ideally start learning self-defense? We're learning it all the time. Every kid learns it. It's one of those, first kids are together and one of them steals the other one's toys and the other one says, mine, and yanks it back. They're learning self-defense. They're learning what works and what doesn't. They're learning what isn't. As much as you at any point are teaching your children are always also teaching and conditioning you. It's how many of your kids liked throwing their food around to make you pick it up. Okay, they are controlling you. And so this is one of the, people are learning self-defense all the time. I think that the biggest thing and one of the hardest is balancing teaching kids to stand up for themselves without being bullies. Because we especially, and this goes to gender, this goes to some other things. Way too often people call it assertive when a guy does it and call it being a bitch when a woman does it. Way too often boys are rewarded for standing up and girls are told that they shouldn't have. So I think that when it really gets into the young stuff, girls should be playing with swords and beating up boys just as much or more, and from an early age, and being told they're okay with it, that you as their parent are okay with it. That's good. Because that's the biggest thing, in my opinion, that we have to fight in self-defense. Isn't, again, anyone who's willing to really hurt someone can hurt someone. It doesn't take a lot of training. If they're willing to bite and scratch and claw and kick, it's really hard to get a 6-year-old in a car. But they have to be given permission to do that, and that's where they're building it. So at that level, Andrew, I think that people are learning self-defense emotionally, verbally, and physically from the time they're babies, whether we know it or not. When it goes into tactical stuff, there's some things I don't like teaching kids because I don't want them to know that there's certain kinds of evil in the world. And that's a hard balance. So we say with the, if someone has free candy written on their van, don't get in the van. But we don't want to tell them why until they're ready to understand why. And that's different for every kid. The physical stuff, I actually prefer that when they're super young, that they do something that moves their body that's not in the fighting context. Starting with gymnastics or tumbling or dance or, climbing, with something super physical, it gives them control over their body. And then as they start showing the interest, you can start moving them into a more combative form. But I'd have to work that out, why that bothers me. And I think it's that when kids are doing martial arts too early, they aren't really doing martial arts. They can't accept the responsibility of hurting, so they don't really get what they're doing, and they think it's something else, or they don't think about it at all. And I realize that I'm probably not making much sense right now, but there's the kids martial arts classes I've seen. I don't want kids getting this inflated sense that they're fighters, because like we talked earlier, as adults, you can sit there and say there are bad consequences, so don't get overconfident. Kids don't see that. They're way more likely to walk into something. Okay, so boil it down. I don't think kids should be learning how to hurt people until you can trust their judgment. I think that's my bottom line on that.